The crystalline towers of Zephyria Prime gleamed under the pale light of 3 distant suns, their surfaces reflecting the panic that gripped the planet's inhabitants. Ambassador Karatha's 6 arms trembled as she stood before the Emergency Council, her translucent blue skin flickering with bioluminescent patterns of distress. "The Devourers have broken through the outer rim," she announced, her melodic voice carrying across the vast chamber where representatives from dozens of peaceful species had gathered. 12 star systems have gone dark in the past solar cycle. We estimate 48 billion souls lost. A collective gasp rippled through the assembly. The Devourers were a name whispered in terror across the galaxy, a machine intelligence that consumed entire worlds, stripping them of all organic matter before moving on to the next target. They had appeared from the void beyond the galactic edge 3 years ago, and nothing had been able to stop their advance. Elder Vorthak of the Gentle Tide Collective raised his tentacled head, his ancient eyes filled with sorrow. "Our combined fleets have fallen before them like leaves in a cosmic storm. The Peaceful Alliance's greatest warships were swept aside as if they were children's toys." "What of the warrior clans of Drex?" asked Captain Zelani, her feline features creased with worry. "Surely their battle-hardened forces can mount some resistance." Ambassador Karatha's light patterns dimmed further. The Dracian armadas engaged them at the Crimson Nebula. Of 3,000 ships, 17 escaped to tell the tale. "The Devourers' technology is beyond our understanding. They adapt to our weapons within moments, and their numbers seem endless." The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of the translation devices and the distant thrum of the city's protective shields. Outside, evacuation ships were already beginning to leave the planet's surface, carrying refugees to temporary safety deeper in Alliance space. But everyone knew it was only delaying the inevitable. "There must be something," whispered Healermere then, her crystalline form resonating with harmonics of desperation. "Some force in the galaxy we haven't contacted, some alliance we haven't formed." Elder Vorthak's tentacles writhed thoughtfully. "The archives speak of legends from the outer spiral arms. Tales of species that evolved on worlds so harsh that survival itself forged them into something different. Deathworlders," breathed Captain Zelani. "I've heard whispers. Planets where the gravity could crush our bones, where the atmosphere itself is poison, where predators hunt with intelligence and cunning." Ambassador Karatha's patterns shifted to curiosity mixed with fear. "Surely you don't suggest we contact such creatures? The few reports we have describe beings of violence and aggression, species that wage war not for resources or territory, but for concepts like honor and freedom. What choice do we have?" Elder Vorthak's voice carried the weight of his 8 centuries of life. "Our philosophy of peace, our advanced technology, our united wisdom, none of it matters when faced with extinction. Perhaps it takes monsters to fight monsters." The debate that followed lasted through the night cycle and into the next day. Some argued that contacting Deathworlders would be inviting destruction from a different source. Others insisted that their peaceful nature made communication impossible with such violent species. But as reports continued to arrive of more systems falling to the Devourers, desperation began to override caution. Finally, Ambassador Karath made the decision that would echo across the galaxy. "We will send the signal. A broad-spectrum emergency broadcast to the Outer Rim worlds, pleading for aid from any who can provide it." The massive communication array on Zephyria Prime's largest moon was reconfigured for maximum range. Scientists worked frantically to encode the message in every known communication protocol, mathematical sequence, and harmonic frequency that might be recognized by unknown species. The message was simple but heartbreaking. "To any who receive this transmission, we are the peaceful alliance of the inner systems. Our worlds are dying. Our people are being consumed by an unstoppable force. We have no weapons that can harm them, no strategies that can defeat them. If you have the power to help, if you have knowledge of warfare we lack, please, we beg you, come to our aid. We have children who have never known violence, elders who have devoted their lives to creation rather than destruction. Do not let us vanish into the darkness without even the memory of our songs." The signal was repeated in 100 different frequencies, broadcast with enough power to reach the farthest edges of the galaxy. Then, they waited. For 3 days, nothing came back but cosmic static and the fading distress calls from systems under attack. Many began to lose hope, believing that either no one had received their message or no one cared enough to respond. On the fourth day, something changed. The first response came from a monitoring station on the edge of Alliance space. The operator, a young Zephyrian named Talith, almost dismissed it as background radiation until his instruments detected an organized pattern within the static. "This is Commander Sarah Chun of the Terran Expeditionary Force." The voice crackled through the comm system, speaking in perfect galactic standard despite no record of the language ever being transmitted to the Outer Rim. "We have received your distress call. Hold your positions and maintain hope. The Legion is coming." Before Talith could respond, the signal cut off, leaving only the soft hum of the equipment and the young operator's racing hearts. He immediately forwarded the recording to Zephyria Prime, where it sent shockwaves through the Emergency Council. Terran, Ambassador Karath studied the linguistic patterns with growing amazement. "Our xenobiologists have no record of this species. How do they speak our language so perfectly?" More concerning, Elder Vorthak noted, is the confidence in their response. "This legion they speak of, they seem certain it can succeed where our combined fleets have failed." Over the following hours, more responses trickled in. Each one came from a different species, yet all spoke the same language of grim determination. The Kytherian war clans acknowledged receipt and reported their ships moving to intercept. Something called the Void Runners confirmed their participation in what they termed pest control operations. Most mysterious of all, a group identifying itself as the Human Naval Defense Corps transmitted simply, "Message received. Cavalry en route." "Humans," Captain Zelani mused. "Another unknown species." Yet their response suggests familiarity with military operations far beyond our experience. The pattern continued throughout the day. Dozens of previously unknown civilizations responded to the Alliance's plea, each promising aid despite having no apparent connection to the threatened systems. Most unsettling was their casual confidence, as if the destruction of an ancient machine intelligence was merely another day's work. Dr. Nareth, the Alliance's leading xenopsychologist, spent hours analyzing the voice patterns and linguistic structures of the responses. Her findings were both fascinating and terrifying. Each of these species demonstrates psychological profiles consistent with apex predator evolution, she reported to the Emergency Council. Their communication patterns show no fear response to the threat described. If anything, they seem eager. Ambassador Karatha's patterns shifted to confusion. Eager to face an enemy that has destroyed our greatest fleets. Consider their word choices. The humans spoke of cavalry, a military term implying rescue operations. The Kytherian response included what translates roughly as "finally, a worthy hunt." These are not beings who flee from danger. Elder Vorthak's ancient mind wrestled with concepts that had no place in Alliance philosophy. "We have spent millennia evolving beyond violence, seeking harmony with all life. But, perhaps, in our pursuit of peace, we have forgotten that sometimes peace must be defended." The first visual confirmation came 12 hours later. Long-range sensors at the edge of Alliance space detected massive energy signatures approaching at speeds that should have been impossible. The ships themselves were unlike anything in Alliance databases. Angular, aggressive designs that seemed built for warfare rather than exploration or diplomacy. "By the seven lights," breathed the sensor operator as the readings came through. "The largest vessels are over 2 kilometers long. Their energy signatures suggest weapon systems that dwarf our planetary defense cannons." Ambassador Karath stared at the tactical display, watching as dozens of unknown ships streaked toward their space. Fear and hope warred within her bioluminescent patterns. They had called for help, and help was coming. But what kind of beings traveled in ships that looked like instruments of war? The answer came when the lead vessel entered communication range. The view screen flickered to life, revealing a creature that defied everything the Alliance thought they knew about intelligent life. The being was bipedal, standing upright on 2 legs like some primitive predator. Its skin was a mottled brown color, scarred by what appeared to be old wounds that had healed incorrectly. Most disturbing were its eyes, small, forward-facing orbs that marked it unmistakably as a hunter species. When it spoke, its voice carried an accent that suggested vocal cords evolved for intimidation rather than harmony. This is Colonel Marcus Rodriguez of the Terran Marine Corps, commanding the assault carrier Indomitable. We've received your distress call and are moving to intercept the hostile force you described. Request immediate tactical briefings and current enemy positions. The directness was startling. No formal greetings, no diplomatic pleasantries, just a demand for information needed to wage war. Ambassador Karath struggled to find an appropriate response. Colonel Rodriguez, we welcome your assistance, though we must warn you that the Devourers have proven immune to every weapon system we possess. Perhaps you should coordinate with our remaining fleet commanders before engaging. The human's scarred face shifted into what might have been amusement. Ma'am, with respect, we didn't travel 8,000 light years to coordinate with anyone. We came here to solve your problem. The only coordination we need is making sure your people stay out of our way while we work. Before Ambassador Karath could respond, more ships appeared on the sensors. Each new arrival was more imposing than the last. Massive dreadnoughts bristling with weapon systems, sleek destroyers that moved like living predators, and carriers disgorging clouds of smaller craft that swarmed through space with deadly purpose. The Legion had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same. The command center of Zephyria Prime hummed with nervous energy as Alliance leaders watched their screens fill with impossible vessels. Ship after ship materialized from the darkness between stars, each one a testament to technologies and philosophies that had never existed in their peaceful galaxy. Ambassador Karatha's 6 arms moved in patterns of bewilderment as she studied the tactical displays. The energy readings don't make sense. Some of these ships are generating power signatures equivalent to small stars. Dr. Nareth leaned over her analysis console, her crystalline form resonating with frequencies of scientific fascination mixed with primal fear. The hull compositions are unlike anything in our databases. These materials don't appear in nature. They've been forged, engineered, weaponized. On the main screen, Colonel Rodriguez's scarred face waited patiently while the Alliance struggled to process what they were seeing. Behind him, other figures moved through what was clearly a military command structure. These humans wore uniforms designed for function rather than beauty, their equipment bearing the scratches and modifications that spoke of actual combat experience. Colonel, Ambassador Karath finally managed. Your fleet is larger than we expected. How many vessels have answered our call? This isn't the fleet, ma'am. This is just the advance guard. We've got another 200 ships arriving over the next 6 hours, plus support from our allies. He paused, consulting something off-screen. The Kytherian war clans are bringing their hunting fleets. The Korvaxi Battle Brothers are deploying 3 full legions. And the Void Runners are contributing their specialty ships for deep space operations. Elder Vorthax's tentacles writhed in patterns that hadn't been seen for centuries, the ancient Zephyrian equivalent of a predator freeze response. 3 full legions? Colonel, exactly how large are your military forces? Well, sir, that's classified, but I can tell you that what we're bringing to this party represents about 2% of our active fleet strength. Figured we'd start small, see what we're dealing with, then call for reinforcements if needed. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft harmonics of the translator systems working overtime. 2%. The Alliance's greatest armadas, the combined might of 1,000 peaceful worlds, had been swept aside like dust. And these Deathworlders were treating the threat as a minor engagement worthy of 2% of their forces. Captain Zalani found her voice first. Colonel, perhaps we should brief you on the enemy capabilities. The Devourers have already read your files, Captain. Downloaded your tactical databases about an hour ago. Interesting opponents, these Devourers. Self-replicating machine intelligence, adaptive defensive systems, energy-based primary weapons, numerical superiority through exponential reproduction. Rodriguez's tone was the same one might use to discuss the weather. We've fought worse. Worse. Ambassador Karatha's bioluminescent patterns flickered between confusion and disbelief. What could be worse than an unstoppable force that adapts to every weapon used against it? Ma'am, last year we fought a war against something called the hive mind of Arcturus. Similar concept, but It used biological rather than mechanical replication. Took us about 6 months to crack their adaptation protocols. Year before that, we dealt with the crystal lords of the Magellanic Clouds, energy beings who could possess any technology they touched. That was a real pain. Had to develop entirely kinetic-based weapons systems. Dr. Naritha's harmonic frequencies shifted to scientific excitement despite her fear. You've encountered multiple existential threats and survived? How is this possible? For the first time, Colonel Rodriguez's expression shifted to something resembling sympathy. Doctor, you've got to understand. Your alliance evolved on garden worlds under gentle stars. You developed philosophy, art, science, all the beautiful things that make civilization worthwhile. But where we come from, those things are luxuries you earn by surviving another day. The viewscreen split to show additional human vessels. Each bridge revealed beings that bore the same forward-facing predator eyes. The same scars that spoke of violence survived. But there were differences too. Some wore different uniforms, carried different equipment, spoke with accents that suggested vast distances between their home worlds. "This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the heavy cruiser Retribution," announced a woman whose dark eyes held depths that spoke of battles fought in the void between stars. "Colonel, we've got positive contact on Devourer scout formations approximately 4 light hours out. Looks like they're moving to intercept our advance elements." "Copy that, Retribution. All ships, implement Protocol 7. Let's see what these machines are made of." Ambassador Karoth watched in fascination as the human fleet shifted formation with a precision that spoke of countless hours of practice. But it wasn't the smooth, elegant movements of Alliance vessels conducting scientific surveys or diplomatic missions. This was the deadly choreography of predators moving to surround prey. "Colonel, perhaps we should establish defensive positions around our remaining worlds," suggested Elder Vorthak. "Our civilian populations, sir. With respect, the best way to protect your civilians is to kill the enemy before they get close enough to threaten them. We didn't come here to play defense." As if summoned by the colonel's words, new contacts appeared on the sensors. The Devourer scout fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, 60 vessels of alien metal and malevolent intelligence, their hulls gleaming with the absorbed materials of a dozen dead worlds. The Alliance Command Center fell silent as they watched their nightmare approach. These were the ships that had swept aside everything the peaceful galaxy could throw at them, machines that learned and adapted with each encounter, becoming stronger with every victory. Colonel Rodriguez studied the enemy formation with the calm attention of a craftsman examining his tools. Interesting design philosophy. They prioritize adaptability over raw firepower, which makes sense for a force designed to operate independently across vast distances. He touched something on his console. "All vessels, you are weapons-free. Show them what we brought to the party." What happened next shattered every assumption the Alliance had about warfare, technology, and the nature of violence itself. The human ships opened fire with weapons that defied understanding. Instead of the elegant energy beams favored by Alliance technology, they launched projectiles that moved at significant fractions of light speed, simple kinetic rounds that struck with the force of small asteroids. But these weren't random shots fired in desperation. Each projectile was precisely targeted, accounting for the enemy's evasion patterns and defensive systems. "Kinetic weapons," Dr. Narith breathed in amazement. "They're using primitive ballistics technology, but at velocities that approach our most advanced energy systems." "Not primitive," Colonel Rodriguez corrected. "Pragmatic. Your energy weapons rely on complex systems that can be analyzed and countered. A chunk of tungsten moving at 40,000 kilometers per second doesn't care about your enemy's adaptive algorithms." The Devourer ships reacted exactly as they had against Alliance forces. Their adaptive systems analyzed the incoming attacks, processed the energy signatures and delivery methods, and began generating countermeasures. But there was nothing to counter. The projectiles weren't energy weapons or guided missiles. They were simple mass moving at incredible velocity. The first Devourer vessel died when a tungsten rod punched through its forward section, and out the rear, the kinetic energy vaporizing everything between entry and exit points. The machine intelligence tried to adapt, angling its hull to deflect the next impact. The projectile punched through the angled armor as if it weren't there. "Impossible," whispered Captain Zelani. "They're destroying Devourer ships with each salvo. Our entire combined fleet couldn't damage a single enemy vessel." "Different approach," Colonel Rodriguez explained while coordinating the battle with casual efficiency. "You tried to outthink them, out-tech them, find clever solutions to tactical problems. We just hit them with enough raw physics to crush their adaptive systems through sheer overwhelming force." But the humans weren't the only ones joining the battle. New contacts appeared as the Kytherian war clans arrived in ships that looked like they'd been grown rather than built. The vessels were organic in design, their hulls rippling with muscle-like tissues and weapons that resembled massive teeth and claws. "This is Hunt Leader Krex of the Bone Ship Eternal Hunger," growled a voice that sent instinctive terror racing through every Alliance member present. "We claim the strongest prey for our own glory. Let the metal minds taste the fury of the hunt." The Kytherian approach to warfare was even more alien than the humans. Their ships moved like living creatures, flowing around enemy fire with predatory grace. Their weapons weren't technological marvels, but biological organisms that burrowed into enemy hulls and began consuming the ships from within. "My readings indicate they're using weaponized parasites," Dr. Nerith reported, her voice shaking. "The organisms are breaking down the Devourer hull materials and replicating themselves using the consumed matter." Elder Vorthax's ancient mind struggled to process the implications. They've turned the Devourer's own replication strategy against them. But how do they prevent their weapons from consuming their own ships? "Genetic locks," Hunt Leader Krex responded, apparently monitoring their transmissions. "Our parasites only consume materials not blessed by the Hunt Mothers. Your peaceful minds could never conceive such weapons because you fear the violence necessary to create them." As if the battle weren't surreal enough, a third faction joined the engagement. The Void Runners appeared not with massive fleets, but with small, incredibly fast ships that seemed to phase in and out of reality itself. "Greetings, meat minds," crackled a transmission filled with static that suggested the speakers existed partially outside normal spacetime. "We have come for the promised chaos. Let us show you how true predators hunt." Their tactics were unlike anything the Alliance had ever witnessed. The Void Runner ships didn't engage the Devourers directly. Instead, they phased through the enemy hulls, their exotic matter composition allowing them to exist briefly in the same space as solid objects. When they phased back to normal space, they left behind small devices that began interfering with the Devourer's quantum-level processes. Ambassador Karath watched in stunned silence as the enemy fleet, the unstoppable force that had consumed 48 billion souls, was systematically dismantled by beings whose very existence challenged everything the Alliance thought they knew about life, intelligence, and survival. "How?" she whispered. "How do such creatures exist without destroying themselves? How do you cooperate with such different species?" Colonel Rodriguez glanced at her, his predator eyes holding something that might have been understanding. "Ma'am, you're thinking about it backwards. We don't cooperate despite our differences. We cooperate because of them. The universe is a hostile place, and sometimes it takes monsters to protect the things worth protecting." The last Devourer scout vessel died in a burst of exotic radiation as a Void Runner phase torpedo detonated inside its central processing core. The battle was over in less than 20 minutes. An enemy force that would have required hours to destroy a single Alliance vessel had been annihilated without the Deathworlder forces suffering a single casualty. "Scout engagement complete," Colonel Rodriguez reported as casually as if he'd been discussing a training exercise. "All enemy contacts eliminated. Beginning deep scan for additional hostile forces." Ambassador Karath stared at the tactical display where debris was all that remained of the Devourer force. But this was only their scout fleet. "The main force will arrive in approximately 14 hours, the colonel confirmed. "According to our intelligence analysis, we should expect roughly 8,000 vessels of various classes, including their command ships and manufacturing platforms." The number sent waves of terror through the Alliance command center. 8,000 ships. The scout fleet of 60 had been terrifying enough, but 8,000 represented a force that could sterilize entire sectors. "Colonel," Elder Vorthax's voice carried the weight of impending doom. our combined fleets never faced more than 300 Devourer vessels at once. 8,000 ships. Is your force sufficient? For the first time since the engagement began, Colonel Rodriguez smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. It was the smile of a predator anticipating a challenging hunt. Sir, 8,000 enemies means we get to field our heavy units. I've been looking forward to this. In the 14 hours between the scout engagement and the main Devourer fleet's arrival, the galaxy witnessed something unprecedented in its peaceful history. The Deathworlders transformed the sector around Zephyria Prime into the most formidable military stronghold ever conceived. Ambassador Karath hadn't slept since the first human ships arrived. She stood in the observation deck of the Alliance Command Station, watching through reinforced transparent aluminum as impossible vessels materialized from hyperspace. Each new arrival defied another law of physics or challenged another assumption about the limits of technology. The energy signatures are off the charts, Dr. Nareth reported, her crystalline form practically vibrating with scientific excitement and terror. Some of these ships are generating power equivalent to our planetary fusion networks. The largest vessel to arrive called itself the World Breaker, and the name proved disturbingly accurate. The ship was 15 kilometers long, its hull a masterwork of angular aggression that seemed designed to intimidate as much as fight. When it powered up its weapons systems for testing, the energy discharge briefly outshone the system's primary star. "This is Admiral Chun aboard the World Breaker," came the transmission from the massive vessel's bridge. "Colonel Rodriguez, status report on enemy force composition and deployment." Colonel Rodriguez appeared on screen from his own ship, looking small and tired compared to the Admiral, but carrying himself with the confidence of a veteran warrior. "Ma'am, we've confirmed 8,000 plus hostile vessels inbound. Main force includes what appear to be manufacturing ships and command centers. Estimated arrival time is now 6 hours. Excellent. Time enough for our allies to finish their preparations." Ambassador Karath turned to Dr. Nareth with growing confusion. Preparations? What more could they possibly need? Her answer came as new contacts began appearing throughout the system. But these weren't ships in any conventional sense. The Kytherian war clans had begun constructing something that hurt to look at directly, a massive organic structure that seemed to be growing in real time, fed by materials harvested from local asteroids. "By the Seven Lights," whispered Elder Vorthak as he joined them at the observation deck. "Are they building a space station?" "Not building," corrected Hunt Leader Krex over the open channel. "Growing. The Great Nest will birth 10,000 warrior drones in the time it takes your hearts to beat 100 times. The Devourers will face not just our ships, but an entire ecosystem designed for war." The structure pulsed with bioluminescent patterns that spoke of predatory intelligence. As they watched, the first warrior drones began emerging. Creatures that looked like a nightmare fusion of insect and machine, each one the size of a fighter craft, and moving with the deadly grace of apex predators. But the Kytherians weren't the only ones preparing. The Void Runners had begun what they called reality alteration. Space itself around their position started displaying properties that made Alliance instruments register impossible readings. "We are preparing the hunting ground," explained their spokesperson, a being whose voice seemed to come from several dimensions at once. "When the metal mines arrive, they will find that the laws of physics themselves have become weapons." Captain Zelani joined the growing crowd at the observation deck, her feline features set in an expression of professional curiosity mixed with existential dread. These beings don't just wage war. They remake entire regions of space to serve their tactical needs. The human fleet continued to grow as well, but their additions were more conventionally terrifying. Massive carrier ships disgorged clouds of fighters that moved in formations that suggested swarm intelligence. Destroyer squadrons took positions that turned the entire system into a kill zone where nothing could move without being targeted by dozens of weapons systems. "This is Captain Maria Santos of the Dreadnought Indefatigable," announced a new voice. "Admiral, we've completed deployment of the gravitational mines. Any enemy vessel that drops out of hyperspace in the target zone will experience tidal forces equivalent to approaching a black hole." Ambassador Karatha's bioluminescent patterns shifted to pure bewilderment. "Gravitational mines? They've weaponized gravity itself. Standard defensive measure. Admiral Chun responded matter-of-factly. We learned that trick fighting the entropy cults of the void. When your enemies can exist partially outside normal space-time, you need to give them a reason to stay in one dimension. More allies continued to arrive. The Korvaxi battle brothers brought ships that looked like mobile fortresses, their hulls bristling with weapons that fired projectiles the size of buildings. Each shot was accompanied by what sounded like battle hymns transmitted on multiple frequencies simultaneously. Warriors of the Stars, boomed the voice of Battle Brother Supreme Thane. We sing the songs of ending for our enemies. Let them hear our approach, and no despair. The Korvaxi concept of warfare appeared to involve turning the entire engagement into a religious ceremony. Their ships moved in patterns that somehow managed to be both tactically sound and aesthetically magnificent, their weapons firing in rhythm with their chanted battle hymns. They're synchronizing their fire patterns to create harmonic resonances, Dr. Nareth observed, studying the sensor readings with growing amazement. Each weapon's discharge reinforces the others, creating standing wave patterns that amplify the destructive effect. But perhaps the most unsettling addition to the Deathworlder alliance was a species that simply called themselves the Architects. They arrived in ships that defied easy description, vessels that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously, their hulls shifting between solid matter, energy patterns, and something that registered as pure mathematical concepts. We have analyzed the enemy's logical structure, their representative announced in a voice that sounded like equations being spoken aloud. We will provide tactical algorithms designed to exploit their adaptive limitations. The architects began deploying devices throughout the system that looked like geometric impossibilities. Each one hummed with energies that made nearby space display properties that hurt to contemplate. Cognitive warfare. Admiral Chun explained when Ambassador Karath asked for clarification. The architects fight by attacking the enemy's ability to process information. They'll turn the Devourer's own intelligence against them. As the final hour before the enemy's arrival approached, Ambassador Karath found herself in the unique position of conducting diplomacy with beings whose very existence challenged everything the Alliance believed about intelligent life. Admiral Chun, she began carefully, your forces are impressive. But, I must ask, how do such violent species maintain stable civilizations? How do you prevent your own destructive capabilities from consuming your societies? The Admiral's scarred face showed what might have been amusement. Ambassador, you're looking at this from the wrong perspective. Violence isn't the opposite of civilization, it's the tool that protects it. Every one of our species learned to be dangerous because something else was trying to kill us first. But surely such aggressive natures must lead to constant warfare among yourselves? Oh, we fight, Admiral Chun confirmed cheerfully. But we fight about ideas, territories, resources, things worth fighting for. And we have rules, codes of conduct that separate warfare from slaughter. The Devourers don't have those limitations. They're not fighting for anything. They're just consuming everything. Hunt Leader Krex's voice rumbled through the communication system. The peaceful races do not understand the necessity of controlled violence. You evolved in gardens where cooperation was always profitable. We evolved in crucibles where cooperation was the only path to survival. The philosophical discussion was interrupted by urgent alerts from the sensor networks. Contact. Multiple hyperspace emergence signatures detected at the edge of the system. 8,237 vessels confirmed. The main tactical display filled with enemy contacts as the Devourer fleet materialized from hyperspace in perfect formation. The sight was both magnificent and terrifying, a wall of alien metal stretching across space. Each ship bristling with weapons and adaptive systems that had learned from consuming entire civilizations. But something was wrong. The Devourers emerged from hyperspace directly into the gravitational mine field, and the results were catastrophic for the machine intelligence. Dozens of ships were immediately torn apart by tidal forces that twisted their hulls into abstract sculptures of metal and circuitry. Interesting, commented one of the architects. Their predictive algorithms failed to account for localized gravitational anomalies. Their adaptability appears limited to threats they can analyze. The surviving Devourer vessels began adapting to the gravitational weapons, their hulls reconfiguring to better handle the exotic forces. But, as they did, the Void Runners struck, phasing through normal space to deliver their reality-altering weapons directly into the enemy formation. Beginning Chaos Protocol, announced the Void Runner spokesperson. Let the meat minds see what happens when physics becomes flexible. The space around the Devourer fleet began exhibiting properties that made Ambassador Karatha's eyes water. Ships that should have been moving forward were suddenly traveling backward through time. Energy beams fired at targets began curving through dimensions that didn't exist. The machine intelligence found itself fighting in an environment where cause and effect had become negotiable concepts. But the real shock came when the human fleet opened fire. Instead of the kinetic weapons used against the scouts, they deployed something that defied every principle of energy conservation the Alliance had ever discovered. 0-point extraction torpedoes away, reported Captain Santos. Target the manufacturing ships first. Cut off their ability to reproduce. The projectiles that streaked toward the enemy fleet looked ordinary enough until they made contact. Then, they began consuming matter at the quantum level, converting it directly into energy, and using that energy to consume more matter in an exponentially expanding reaction. By the ancient codes, breathed Elder Vordhack, they're turning the enemy ships into fuel for their own weapons. Ambassador Karath watched in stunned silence as the battle unfolded. This wasn't warfare as the Alliance understood it. This was the application of physics as a weapon, reality itself being turned against the enemy. The peaceful races had spent millennia learning to work with the universe. The Deathworlders had spent the same time learning to make the universe work for them. The Devourer fleet tried to adapt, their machine intelligence analyzing each new threat and developing countermeasures. But they were fighting on multiple fronts simultaneously. Kinetic weapons that couldn't be countered, biological weapons that consumed their hulls, gravitational anomalies that twisted space, reality alterations that made their sensors provide impossible readings, and cognitive attacks that corrupted their data processing. They're struggling to prioritize, Dr. Nareth observed, her scientific mind fascinated despite her terror. Their adaptive systems are designed to handle sequential threats, but they're facing simultaneous attacks that operate on completely different principles. The battle became a demonstration of everything the Alliance had never imagined. The Korvaxi battle brothers sang their enemies to death with harmonic weapons that vibrated enemy hulls apart at the molecular level. The Kytherian warrior drones swarmed through the enemy formation like antibodies attacking a virus, each one designed to be individually expendable, but collectively overwhelming. And through it all, the human fleet coordinated the chaos with a precision that spoke of countless battles fought in the darkness between stars. Their ships moved with the deadly grace of pack hunters, each vessel covering others while maneuvering for killing shots. Admiral Colonel Rodriguez reported from his position in the thick of the fighting. Enemy manufacturing capability has been eliminated. Recommend transition to Phase 2. Admiral Chin's response was delivered with the same casual tone she might use to order coffee. All units, implement maximum firepower protocols. Time to end this. What happened next burned itself into the memories of every Alliance observer. The Deathworlder fleet stopped holding back. Weapons that had been firing at reduced power suddenly unleashed their full capabilities. Ships that had been maneuvering defensively shifted to pure assault formations. The space around Zephyria Prime became a cauldron of destructive energies that briefly outshone the system's star. When the light faded and the sensors cleared, the Devourer fleet was simply gone. 8,000 ships that had been the terror of the galaxy had been reduced to scattered atoms floating in space. The battle that the Alliance had expected to be a desperate last stand had lasted exactly 43 minutes. All hostile contacts eliminated, Admiral Chin announced. Beginning sweep for survivors and stragglers. Colonel Rodriguez, prepare your Marines for boarding operations on any intact hulks. Ambassador Karath stared at the empty space where moments before the greatest threat in galactic history had assembled for what everyone assumed would be an unstoppable assault. It's over? Just like that. Ma'am, Admiral Chin's voice carried a note of gentle correction. This wasn't the war. This was just the opening engagement. We still need to track down their source, eliminate their manufacturing base, and make sure they can't threaten anyone ever again. The Peaceful Alliance had called for help against an unstoppable enemy. What they had received was a reminder that in a universe full of wonders and terrors, sometimes the greatest wonder was meeting someone more terrifying than your worst nightmare. 3 days after the destruction of the Devourer fleet, the Deathworlder Alliance had transformed the Zephyrius system into something that resembled a military academy more than a battlefield. Ambassador Karath moved through the human flagship Worldbreaker like a student observing alien gods at work. The enemy's source point has been isolated, Admiral Chun explained as they walked through corridors that hummed with barely contained energies. Deep space reconnaissance indicates a construction complex approximately 800 light-years beyond the galactic rim. Intelligence suggests it's been operating for several millennia. The scale of the briefing room matched everything else about the human vessel. Vast, functional, and designed to accommodate hundreds of officers planning operations that spanned light years. Holographic displays showed the galaxy from perspectives that the Alliance had never achieved, marked with threat assessments and tactical overlays that spoke of military minds that thought in terms of entire star clusters. Several millennia? Dr. Naratha's crystalline form resonated with frequencies of scientific horror. They've been building for thousands of years. Which explains their numbers, added Hunt Leader Krex, his massive form dominating one corner of the briefing room. The Kytherian had requested permission to participate in planning sessions, claiming that understanding prey behavior was essential to successful hunting. The metal mines reproduce like viruses, but viruses that require massive industrial infrastructure. Colonel Rodriguez pointed to the tactical display where streams of data flowed in patterns that made Ambassador Karatha's eyes ache. Long-range sensors indicate at least 50,000 vessels at the source facility, plus manufacturing capability that could produce another 100,000 within a standard year. We're looking at an artificial species that's been preparing for galactic conquest longer than some of our civilizations have existed. The numbers were staggering, but what struck Ambassador Karath most was the complete lack of fear or despair among the Deathworlders. If anything, they seemed energized by the scope of the challenge. 50,000 ships, mused Battle Brother Supreme Thane, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested he was composing battle hymns in real time. A worthy choir of endings to sing. My warriors grow restless with anticipation. The target facility exists in an area of space where normal physics operates differently, added the architect representative, their mathematical voice solving equations as they spoke. The enemy has chosen their location well. Conventional weapons will have reduced effectiveness due to spatial distortions. Admiral Chin nodded as if this was merely another tactical consideration rather than a fundamental challenge to everything the Alliance knew about warfare. Which is why we're implementing Operation Pandora's Box. Time to deploy assets that normally stay in the deep storage lockers. Ambassador Karath had learned enough about Deathworlder psychology to recognize that tone. Admiral Chun was discussing weapons that even these apex predator species considered too dangerous for normal use. Ma'am, she ventured carefully, what exactly does your species keep in deep storage? The Admiral's scarred face showed what might have been embarrassment. Ambassador, there are some technologies that work so well they become problematic. Weapons that don't just kill enemies, but make the space they occupied uninhabitable for centuries. Devices that can destabilize stars or turn planets into black holes. Tools that make reality itself hostile to life. We call them species-ending weapons, Colonel Rodriguez added helpfully. Generally, we prefer not to use them because they tend to solve problems by eliminating everything within several light years of the target. Dr. Naratha's harmonic frequencies shifted to pure terror. You've created weapons that can destroy entire species? And you consider this normal? Not normal, Hunt Leader Krex corrected. Necessary. In a universe where extinction-level threats exist, you must have extinction-level responses. The alternative is to let monsters like the Devourers consume everything beautiful and peaceful. The philosophical implications were staggering. The Alliance had spent millennia developing technologies that enhanced life and promoted understanding. These beings had spent the same time creating tools that could unmake existence itself. Yet they had answered a call for help from strangers without hesitation. The question, Admiral Chen continued, is whether we can eliminate the Devourer source without rendering that entire region of space permanently uninhabitable. We need surgical strikes that leave the surrounding systems intact. The planning session that followed revealed the true scope of Deathworlder cooperation. Each species contributed capabilities that were both magnificent and terrifying. The humans offered strategic coordination and weapons that turned physics into a weapon. The Kytherians provided biological expertise and warrior drones that could survive in environments that would kill conventional forces. The Korvaxi brought harmonic weapons that could shatter matter at the quantum level. The Void Runners offered the ability to phase through normal space-time, and the Architects provided computational warfare that attacked the enemy's ability to process information. But the most unsettling contribution came from a species that had remained silent until now. The beings that called themselves the Shepherds had ships that registered on sensors as spaces where nothing existed, not vacuum, not even the quantum foam that filled empty space, but absolute nothingness given form. We maintain the boundaries between what is and what should not be, their representative explained in a voice that seemed to come from the spaces between atoms. The metal minds have transgressed those boundaries. They must be returned to the void. Ambassador Karath didn't pretend to understand what that meant. But the way every other Deathworlder species fell silent when the Shepherds spoke suggested capabilities that were respected even among apex predators. The strike force that assembled over the following week defied every principle of fleet composition the Alliance had ever developed. Instead of organizing by ship class or tactical role, the Deathworlders formed hunting packs based on predator instincts and combat philosophies that had evolved across dozens of hostile worlds. This is Wolfpack Alpha, reported Captain Elena Vasquez from the heavy cruiser Retribution. Human heavy units and Korvaxi battle singers ready for deep strike operations. Hunting Pride Eternal confirms readiness. Hunt Leader Krex announced from his organic command ship. Kytherian bioweapons and Void Runner phase strikers will penetrate enemy defensive perimeters. The Architects and Shepherds will provide reality modification and existential warfare support, added the mathematical voice that somehow spoke for both species simultaneously. Ambassador Karath watched the final preparations from the observation deck of the World Breaker, accompanied by Elder Vorthak and Dr. Nerith. The Alliance representatives had been invited to observe the operation, though Admiral Chun had made it clear they would be staying well behind the engagement zone. This isn't diplomacy or exploration, the Admiral had explained. This is extermination warfare against an existential threat. You don't want to see what we become when we stop pretending to be civilized. The jump to the enemy's location took 18 hours of travel through hyperspace regions that the Alliance had never mapped. When they emerged, Ambassador Karath understood why the Devourers had chosen this location for their primary facility. The space around them was wrong in ways that made her brain struggle to process the sensory input. Stars existed in impossible configurations, their light arriving before it had been emitted. Gravity flowed in directions that had no names, and time itself seemed to move in stuttering spirals rather than straight lines. Spatial distortion field confirmed, Dr. Nerith reported, her instruments producing readings that defied interpretation. Local physics appear to be operating under modified rules that favor mechanical intelligence over organic life. Clever, admitted one of the Architects. The enemy has chosen a location where their computational advantages are enhanced while our biological responses are impaired. At the center of this impossible region of space sat the Devourer construction facility, a structure so vast it registered as a small moon on their sensors. Mechanical appendages stretched out from its core like the legs of some cosmic spider, each one large enough to construct capital ships. Around it, the 50,000-vessel fleet moved in patterns that spoke of machine intelligence coordinating on a scale that biological minds couldn't match. Target confirmed, Admiral Chen announced. All units, implement final approach vectors. Remember, we need to completely eliminate their reproduction capability while preserving the local stellar geography. What followed was unlike any battle the Alliance could have imagined. The Deathworlder fleet didn't charge directly at the enemy stronghold. Instead, they began systematically altering the nature of space itself around their target. The Void Runners phased into dimensions that intersected normal space at impossible angles, allowing them to attack the construction facility from directions that didn't exist. Their weapons struck targets that were simultaneously too close and too far away, bypassing conventional defenses by ignoring the spatial relationships those defenses were designed to protect. The Shepherds simply erased sections of enemy fleet from existence. Their weapons didn't destroy matter or energy. They removed the possibility that those ships had ever existed, leaving gaps in reality that hurt to look at directly. Existential warfare confirmed effective, reported the Shepherd representative. Enemy adaptive systems cannot compensate for attacks that operate outside causal frameworks. The architects deployed computational viruses that attacked the enemy's intelligence at the conceptual level. Devourer ships began displaying impossible behaviors as their thinking processes were corrupted by logic bombs that made their own thoughts into weapons against themselves. Cognitive kill confirmed on enemy command clusters, the mathematical voice reported. Their coordination algorithms have been infected with recursive paradoxes that prevent effective decision-making. But the most devastating attacks came from the combined human and Korvaxi forces. Working in perfect harmony, they unleashed weapons that turned the enemy's numbers against them. Harmonic resonance weapons created standing wave patterns that built up destructive interference between nearby Devourer vessels, causing them to literally tear themselves apart through their own gravitational interactions. Magnificent. Battle Brother Supreme, Thane's voice boomed across the communications network as his ships sang destruction into existence. Watch as the enemy's strength becomes their weakness. Let them learn that unity without wisdom is merely shared doom. The battle raged for 6 hours, but it wasn't the desperate struggle that Alliance forces had experienced. This was systematic extermination carried out with the efficiency of apex predators culling a diseased herd. Every move was calculated, every weapon deployment designed to achieve maximum effect while minimizing collateral damage to local spacetime. When the final Devourer vessel was eliminated and the construction facility reduced to component atoms, Ambassador Karath found herself staring at empty space that somehow felt cleaner than it had before the battle began. Threat elimination confirmed, Admiral Chen announced. All enemy vessels destroyed, manufacturing capability eliminated, local spacetime restored to standard parameters. Elder Vorthax's tentacles writhed in patterns that hadn't been seen for centuries. Ancient Zephyrian expressions of awe that predated their evolution into peaceful beings. You didn't just defeat them. You unmade them, wiped them from existence as if they had never been. That was the point, Colonel Rodriguez replied matter-of-factly. Species like the Devourers can't be defeated conventionally because they adapt to everything you throw at them. You have to attack them with concepts they can't process, forces they can't understand, and weapons they can't counter because those weapons operate outside the logical frameworks they're designed to navigate. Dr. Naratha's crystalline form resonated with frequencies of scientific wonder and existential terror. You've turned abstract concepts into weapons. Logic, causality, existence itself. You've weaponized the fundamental principles that govern reality. Welcome to Deathworlder warfare, Admiral Chun said with what might have been sympathy. When your survival depends on winning fights against impossible odds, you learn to make the impossible work for you instead of against you. As the combined fleet prepared for the journey back to Alliance space, Ambassador Karath realized that the galaxy had changed forever. The peaceful races had learned that they weren't alone, that beyond their garden worlds existed beings who had turned survival itself into an art form. More importantly, they had learned that sometimes the monsters were on their side. 6 months after the elimination of the Devourer threat, Ambassador Karath stood in what had once been the council chambers of Zephyria Prime. The elegant crystalline architecture remained unchanged, but the chamber itself had been transformed into something unprecedented in Alliance history. A diplomatic meeting between peaceful garden worlders and apex predator species that had never known a day without the possibility of violent death. The transformation hadn't been easy. Initial attempts at standard diplomatic protocols had failed spectacularly when Hunt Leader Krex had interpreted formal greetings as challenge displays and responded by listing the battles where he had devoured his enemies. The Void Runners had phased through several walls during their first visit, apparently unaware that solid matter barriers were meant to be respected. The architects had begun redesigning the building's structural mathematics without permission, improving its efficiency, but giving everyone headaches from the non-Euclidean geometry. The cultural integration challenges are significant, Dr. Nareth admitted, her crystalline form displaying stress patterns as she monitored the latest diplomatic sessions. Their concepts of social interaction evolved in environments where a moment's weakness could mean extinction. They literally cannot comprehend our peaceful negotiation methods. Elder Vorthax's tentacles moved in patterns of thoughtful concern as he watched the proceedings through reinforced observation windows. Yet they risked everything to save strangers they had never met. Their capacity for violence is matched by an equally powerful drive to protect those they consider worthy of protection. The breakthrough had come when Admiral Chun suggested abandoning traditional diplomacy entirely. Instead of formal negotiations, she proposed what she called warrior councils, gatherings where each species demonstrated their capabilities and discussed how those capabilities could benefit others. Think of it as show and tell, Colonel Rodriguez had explained, but with weapons of mass destruction. The results had been both terrifying and enlightening. The humans demonstrated gravitational manipulation technologies that could move asteroids with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. The Kytherians showed how their biological engineering could transform lifeless worlds into garden paradises in a matter of decades. The Korvaxi revealed harmonic technologies that could accelerate planetary healing after environmental disasters. But, perhaps most importantly, the Deathworlders had begun teaching. This is incorrect thinking, Hunt Leader Krex was explaining to a gathering of Alliance military advisors, his massive form somehow managing to seem professorial rather than threatening. You plan for war by preparing to repeat the last war you fought. Predators plan for war by imagining the worst possible enemy they might face, then preparing to fight something twice as dangerous. The Kytherian had become an unexpected expert at strategic planning, his predator instincts translating perfectly into military doctrine. Under his guidance, Alliance forces were learning to think like hunters rather than gardeners. Consider the Devourer scenario, he continued, using holographic displays that showed tactical formations evolved on worlds where every day was a struggle for survival. Your first instinct was to meet them with superior technology. But technology can be analyzed, copied, countered. Instead, you should have asked, what would terrify a machine intelligence that believes it can adapt to everything? Captain Zelani, who had become the unofficial liaison between Alliance and Deathworlder military forces, raised her hand. How do we develop that kind of tactical thinking when our entire civilization has been built on cooperation and peaceful resolution? By remembering that cooperation is itself a weapon, Hunt Leader Krex replied. The metal mines were destroyed not by any single species, but by multiple species working together to present them with simultaneous challenges they could not process. Your peaceful philosophy is actually a military advantage. You can cooperate with beings that my kind would normally view as competing predators. Similar exchanges were happening throughout the system. The Void Runners were teaching Alliance scientists how to manipulate space-time in ways that had never occurred to peaceful minds. Their lessons weren't about weapons, but about exploration, how to travel between dimensions, how to study physics from perspectives that existed outside normal reality. Reality is much larger than you imagine. Their representative had explained to a gathering of physicists whose worldview had been shattered multiple times over the past months. What you call impossible is simply unfamiliar. We will show you how to make the unfamiliar serve purposes your peaceful minds can conceive, but your limited experience cannot achieve. The architects had proven equally valuable teachers, though their lessons required translators to convert mathematical concepts into forms that biological minds could process. They were sharing computational techniques that allowed organic intelligences to solve problems that had previously required massive computer networks. Your minds think in parallel rather than series, one of them had observed. This is why you developed art, philosophy, emotion, concepts that are computationally inefficient but remarkably effective at generating novel solutions to complex problems. But the most profound changes were happening at the cultural level. The Alliance had always prided itself on being a peaceful civilization, but They were learning that peace without the ability to defend it was simply an invitation for predators to feed. Ambassador Karath found herself in the unique position of negotiating the first mutual defense treaty between garden worlders and apex predator species. The negotiations were unlike anything in diplomatic history, partly because the Deathworlders kept offering more than they were asking for. "We don't want your territory," Admiral Chun had explained during one session. "Most of your worlds are too gentle for our kind anyway. We'd go crazy from boredom within a generation. What we want is the knowledge that there are still places in the universe where beautiful things can exist without having to fight for survival every day." The concept had taken weeks for Ambassador Karath to fully understand. The Deathworlders weren't seeking to expand their territories or access Alliance resources. They genuinely wanted to protect civilizations that had achieved the peace and prosperity their own species had never known. "Your art, your music, your philosophy," Hunt Leader Krex had added, his massive form somehow managing to convey wistfulness. "These things cannot exist where every moment might bring death. You have achieved something we can protect, but never possess for ourselves." The alliance that emerged from these negotiations was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The formal document, when finally completed, read more like a friendship pact than a military treaty. The peaceful alliance would provide technological expertise, cultural knowledge, and scientific research that could benefit all member species. In return, the Deathworlder Legion would maintain rapid response forces capable of addressing existential threats to any member civilization. But the most important provision was the establishment of exchange programs. Young Alliance members would spend time with Deathworlder species to learn survival skills and strategic thinking. Young Deathworlders would live among peaceful civilizations to experience what life was like when cooperation was more valuable than competition. "It's not about making us more violent or making them more peaceful," Dr. Nareth had explained to the Ratification Council. "It's about creating a civilization that can be both gentle and strong, both peaceful and prepared." The first exchange groups had already begun their programs. Ambassador Karath had watched with fascination as young Zephyrians learned basic survival skills from Kytherian instructors, their bioluminescent patterns shifting to frequencies that hadn't been seen since their pre-civilized ancestors. Similarly, young humans were spending months in Alliance research facilities, their natural aggression channeled into scientific pursuits that pushed the boundaries of knowledge. "They're not trying to change us," reported Dr. Salen, one of the Alliance researchers working with human exchange students. "They're trying to understand us. Their questions challenge assumptions we didn't even know we had." The most successful program had been the Joint Exploration Initiative. Mixed crews of Alliance scientists and Deathworlder warriors were venturing into regions of space that had previously been too dangerous for either group to investigate alone. The peaceful species provided scientific expertise and diplomatic skills, while the Deathworlders offered protection and the kind of strategic thinking that came from evolution on hostile worlds. "We're discovering things we never imagined," reported Captain Martinez from the exploration vessel Unity, the first jointly crewed ship in galactic history. "The Deathworlders see patterns in dangerous phenomena that we miss because we've never had to think like prey. Meanwhile, we see beauty and scientific opportunity in things they dismiss as merely threatening." But perhaps the most significant change was psychological. The Alliance had always lived with the fear that someday they might encounter a threat too great to handle through peaceful negotiation. That fear had shaped their entire civilization, making them cautious and defensive even in their moments of greatest triumph. Now they knew that such threats existed, but they also knew they weren't alone in facing them. "We sleep better now," Elder Vorthak had admitted during one of his private conversations with Ambassador Karath. "For the first time in our recorded history, we know with certainty that there are beings in the universe who will fight to protect the things we've built, even though they could never build such things themselves." The galaxy had changed. Where once there had been a clear division between peaceful garden worlders and violent Deathworld species, now there was something new, a civilization that combined the best of both evolutionary paths. The peaceful alliance had called for help against an unstoppable enemy, and help had arrived in the form of beings more dangerous than their worst nightmares. But Those beings had proven to be protectors rather than conquerors, guardians who found their purpose in defending rather than destroying. 6 months after the desperate SOS that had changed everything, Ambassador Karath stood in her transformed office, looking out at a system where ships from dozens of species moved in harmony. Human destroyers patrolled alongside Zephyrian research vessels. Kytherian bioships shared space with Alliance passenger liners. Void Runner phase ships flickered in and out of normal space while maintaining formation with conventional craft. It wasn't the peaceful galaxy the Alliance had always imagined. It was something better, a galaxy where peace existed not because violence was impossible, but because those capable of violence had chosen to use their strength to protect rather than conquer. The Deathworlders had taught them that true peace wasn't the absence of conflict, but the presence of those willing to stand between the peaceful and those who would harm them. In return, the Alliance had given them something they had never known, a purpose beyond mere survival, a reason to use their terrible capabilities in service of beauty rather than destruction. As she watched a group of young humans and Zephyrians working together on a joint research project, their different evolutionary paths creating insights that neither species could have achieved alone, Ambassador Karath realized that the galaxy's future was brighter than anyone had dared imagine. The monsters had arrived when called, but they had chosen to become guardians instead. And that choice had transformed not just the Alliance, but the very meaning of civilization itself. The SOS had been answered not just with rescue, but with the promise that never again would peaceful beings face extinction alone. In a universe full of wonders and terrors, they had found the greatest wonder of all, protectors who were more dangerous than their nightmares, but who used that danger to ensure that nightmares remained nothing more than bad dreams.